describe.
Popcorn therapy. Holistic health and wellness through the lens of pop culture. Welcome to another episode of Popcorn Therapy, where we use pop culture as therapy and where we talk about therapy within the context of movies and TV and stuff like that, and also think about how these movies, TV, songs, whatever it is, sort of fit into who we are as a culture. And the movie that I want to talk about today is Splash, 1984's Mermaid romance, starring Daryl Hannah and Tom Hanks. This is a movie that I loved as a child. I think it was one of those movies for me that had this erotic energy to it that, you know, when you're younger and you watch something like that, you kind of, there's some mystery in it. There's something really fascinating about it. You kind of want to understand it, but you don't quite get it yet. And so you watch the movie over and over again, which I did with The Little Mermaid as well, which I feel like is a close cousin to Splash. So Splash was made in 1984, and it's sort of a grown-up version of The Little Mermaid, but The Little Mermaid was actually made in 1989, so it's actually a precursor to The Little Mermaid. But the narratives are similar, and the concept is similar. And I think that part of the reason that I loved both of these movies is obviously mermaids are awesome, and I loved mermaids as a kid and I wanted to be one, but I think the reason I felt that way was partly because of these movies. And I think it was really the narratives of desire in these movies that really spoke to me. And I think something about the being different of it all, sort of wanting to step into a different world, a different reality, and see if you would fit in better there. So in both The Little Mermaid and Splash, we have a fish out of water, literally. And that fish out of water is trying to navigate this new world and figure out if they fit better in this new world than the place where they came from. I think this resonated for me because I was a very sensitive kid in a family that, not that the people in my family weren't sensitive, but we were the kind of family that didn't really talk about things openly necessarily. And when there were stressors and so on, you know, my parents, with the best of intentions, tried to protect me from what was happening. So they didn't talk to me about it. But what ended up happening is that was a very anxious situation for me because I was feeling these big feelings, noticing other people feeling big feelings, but not really understanding what was going on. And a lot of what I've done in my adult life is try to figure out how to work with my big feelings in a way that works for me and helps other people to work with their big feelings. So obviously I became a counselor, among other things. So I'll catch you up a little bit on the plot of Splash if you don't know it, and we'll talk a little bit about the movie from there. So Splash begins with Tom Hanks on a boat in Cape Cod and his creepy brother, who in his grown-up form is played by John Candy. They're on this boat together. They're supposed to be playing and having a good time, but Tom Hanks is just looking into the water. He sort of sees something. He jumps in or falls in. We actually don't know. He meets this beautiful child mermaid under the water, and they have this really sweet moment, and then he's rescued and pulled away from the mermaid. Cut to many years in the future, Tom Hanks is an adult now, and Daryl Hannah, who is the adult version of this mermaid that he met in the water, comes to find him. She rescues Tom Hanks from almost drowning because he can't swim. Which is this part of it's a metaphor, I think, of him not being willing to touch into this aspect of himself that he's always been drawn to. And I'll come back to that. It has to do with commitment issues and stuff like that. But anyway, he never learned to swim. And so he finds himself kind of drunk and hungover trying to make it back to Cape Cod because he just feels like there's something there for him. He gets abandoned on this boat. He falls into the water and the mermaid rescues him. The moment that they meet, she comes up to him and just kisses him full on the mouth. And I love this moment because, especially in the first part of Splash, there's so much enthusiastic consent. And there's a lot of sexual energy that is driven by Daryl Hannah's character, by the mermaid, who's later named Madison. She knows what she wants. She goes for it. She assumes that it's going to be given back to her. She doesn't have any insecurity or anything like that. She wants to kiss Tom Hanks's character's named Alan, and so she does it. She's gorgeous, of course. She's naked. Also, Tom Hanks is sort of bewildered by all of this. She jumps into the water, and a little piece of trivia about this is that her butt had some CGI hair added to it later to make this movie a little more Disney appropriate. So she has this kind of hairy butt moment when she jumps back into the water. It should have been a nude butt, but we get a hairy CGI butt instead, which is kind of funny. So anyway, the two of them get to know each other. She is living with Alan. He sort of offers at a certain point, like, where do you want to stay? And she's like, oh my gosh, no, let me stay with you. Like, that's where I want to be. She reveals that she's only there for 6 days and then she has to go back where she came from. And if she stays any longer than the 6 days, she can't ever go back to her home. Tom Hanks doesn't figure out that she's a mermaid this whole time. There are a lot of clues that she's probably a mermaid. There's this one sort of famous scene that I think a lot of people remember if they remember anything from watching this movie, which is when Alan is asleep. They've been having sex like constantly. He's exhausted in the bed. And then she has a bath. She pours a bunch of salt in the bath. She gets in the water and her mermaid tail flops out of the bath with this relief of like taking her bra off after a really long sweaty day. It's sort of got that feeling to it. There's something really comfortable and liberating and erotic about that moment. It's dark, the water's running, and Alan figures out that she's in there. And for reasons unknown, he insists that she opens the door. He really wants to know what she's doing in there. She says, I'm fine, I'm fine. She doesn't want him to find out she's a mermaid. And he almost breaks down the door. Alan is a very yelly kind of character. You don't get a great sense of why she's so into Alan, aside from them having this connection, I guess, when they were children. Because he's sort of like a dumb guy a lot, and then he's a yelling guy a lot, and you don't totally get a good sense of like where he's coming from. We learn about his commitment issues pretty early on. He's on the phone with someone that he's dating, and she says, I love you, and he kind of can't say it back, and it's this weird sort of moment where he can't seem to commit to anything. So he's a bit of a dud, I think, from the perspective of a viewer like me, maybe, but she loves him, and we love her, so we want whatever she wants. So the two of them get to know each other, and there's a moment when he asks what her name is, and she tries to pronounce it in Mermaidish. And it's this sort of screeching dolphin-like sound that breaks all the TVs in the vicinity. And so he's like, okay, well, I can't pronounce that. So what do you want to be called? He's naming names. He's like, oh, we're on Madison Avenue. And she's like, Madison, that's the name that I want. And thus were born many millennial girls named Madison. I'm sure you know at least one person named Madison. It's because of this movie. So anyway, he remains clueless about her mermaidness, even though there are all these big clues that she is one. Meanwhile, she has a scientist, Eugene Levy, who's amazing as always, looking for her. He thinks he's found a mermaid and he wants to find out. And so he's sort of hunting her. And he has this whole part where he carries a bucket of water through the streets, deciding that he wants to get her wet to prove that she's a mermaid. Tom Hanks doesn't believe this, but he's falling in love with her. And at one point, he asks her to marry him. And it's an interesting moment because she says no. She obviously loves Alan. She wants to be with him, but she says no. She essentially chooses herself, her background, her family. We don't really know anything about her before life in this movie, but she says, I can't do that because if I stay, I can't ever go back home. And Tom Hanks throws a little hissy fit about this. And he, at a certain point, says, listen, I know that you have some secret that you want to tell me. And I really don't care what it is. Like, whatever it is, tell me. He says, are you dying? Were you once a man? I don't care. Want to marry you no matter what. And I think that's an interesting moment as well, because it's sort of a slipped in little moment of trans awareness, I guess, or allyship, perhaps. It may have also been a throwaway joke. I don't really know how the writers intended that moment. And I think that, again, I'm not sure if this was something that people were really aware of in the Splash 1984 era, but mermaids are coded trans. So I'll talk more about this on another episode, but rewatching The Little Mermaid recently, I was thinking about trans identity a lot because Ariel desperately wants to be human. She wants to have a different body than the one she has. She always knows this about herself, and she desperately wants a chance to be in the body that she feels would fit her better. And I think taking a trans reading of The Little Mermaid and Splash to a degree, it illuminates it in a different way. So from what I understand, I'm not a trans person, I'm a cisgendered person, but from what I understand, a lot of trans people relate to that mermaid identity and these old mermaid movies because there's something really relatable about that feeling of a mermaid wanting to have a different body and try to live on land. So as I mentioned, for me, it's not a trans specific relatability, but it's that relatability of like, I feel different. I'm not sure that this is where I belong, and I want to try living in a different world, having a different body, having a different experience, and seeing if that's where I would fit better. So I think both of the mermaids in these movies do that. And then there's this moment where Tom Hanks kind of names it, and he says, if you were a man before, I don't care. Like, I love you for you. So interestingly, he eventually does, of course, find out that she's a mermaid because Eugene Levy does succeed in getting her wet with a bucket of water and turning her into a mermaid in front of everybody, which is a heartbreaking scene because, she's just saying, Alan, 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 and all these people are crowding around her. She gets carted away and he's just sort of frozen in shock, not doing anything. So, it feels that in this moment, it wasn't true what he said, that I don't care what your secret is. I don't care who you really are. I'm not comfortable with this. And then he goes on this sort of mermaid racist sort of rant about how, like, your lover should at least be human and so on. And I think, again, reading this from a trans lens, there's sort of that fear of, if you were a trans person or if you were closeted in some way about who you are and then fell in love with someone without them knowing that thing about you, when you reveal that secret, there's a terror that they would fully reject you for that, whether that's a gay identity, trans identity, but it's still sort of that feeling of like, when I fully reveal myself, if someone rejects me for that or abandons me for that, it's like, it feels like it's, painful to my very soul. So, this is a silly movie. It's a comedy. It's definitely not that serious, but, that was a moment where I was really feeling some things and just furious with Alan for like, what are you doing? Like, go to her aid. She's been with you. You wanted to marry her. You said you didn't care, and you're just letting her get carted away by these scientists who turn out to be very evil scientists. So there's a bit of anti-science mode in this movie as well, which is a motif you see in a lot of movies even today, where there's this sort of fear of like, oh, if scientists had all that power, like what would they do with it? How would they study it? All these things. There's some science fear that I think we saw a lot of, especially during the COVID pandemic. There was a lot of like, okay, was it a lab leak? Like, what are these vaccines doing? There's a lot of sort of fear of innovation, I think, that exists in the shadows of our culture from time to time. So this is one of those moments where poor Madison is being held in a tank and her tail is getting all flaky and she's looking really bad. And Eugene Levy, I love this aspect of the movie. He's been this kind of evil scientist guy this whole time, but he has empathy for her. He notices like, oh, she's really not feeling well. Like, what's happening for her? What are you doing to her? Can you be gentler with her? Can we maybe take care of her? And then he turns into a good guy and he actually helps her escape later in the movie. But Alan, he's caught as well, put in the tank with her. And she's just sort of trying to reach out to him, like, can we talk? And he's just like, no, you're a mermaid. Like, I hate you now. It's so brutal. And then he has a conversation with his brother, played by John Candy. This is another issue that I have in this movie. John Candy is fat comic relief. I feel like you don't see this as much in movies today, but maybe you still do to a degree. In one of my recent episodes, I talked about Bridgerton and how Penelope, who is in a larger body, is a romantic lead in that show. And that's unusual. That's just not something that we see a lot of the time. The fat character is usually the comic relief, like in Splash, or, maybe a best friend or something, but rarely the lead. So not only is John Candy some comic relief, but he's also it's sort of hateful, I think, the way that this movie portrays him. He's smoking cigarettes while he's exercising, and he really can't exercise because he's so fat. He's perverted. There's this sort of running joke where he looks underneath women's skirts, even as an adult, which is like jail behavior. Like, no, that is absolutely not okay. But he comes through in this moment where he says, a lot of people don't get the true love that they want in their lives. Who cares if she's a mermaid? Like, just go be with her, which is the first reasonable thing anybody says in this movie. And it comes from John Candy's mouth. So he sort of comes to his senses. He rescues Madison, hijinks ensue. And then towards the end, there's a moment where he sets her free and like sends her back into the ocean. And then she kind of says, you could come with me. Like when you're with me, you can breathe underwater. You could basically become a mermaid with me. And he says, oh no, I can't do that. Like I can't even swim. But he sees her swimming away and he jumps into the water after her. And they have this beautiful reunion. And the movie ends with the two of them swimming underwater. And there's like beautiful coral reefs. So we're like, are we still in Cape Cod? Like what's happening? He's still wearing his suit. It's a sweet moment though. And I think what's kind of nice about it is that that's a moment where he really gets over his fear of commitment, because not only is he committing to a woman, he decides to commit to a whole other life. And you get the sense that Alan has also been a fish out of water in a lot of ways throughout this whole movie. So if you scale it back to the scene at the beginning where he and his brother are on this boat in Cape Cod and they're supposed to be having a good time and everybody's dancing around and there's music playing, and Alan just isn't getting it. He's staring out into the ocean wanting something else. And throughout the movie, you kind of see how he doesn't really fit with the people around him. We don't hear too much about his family, but aside from his brother, John Candy, and they couldn't be more different. But, it turns out that he's the one who actually wants to become a mermaid at the end, to have a different life, to find a different family, under the sea, which he does. So I think that's actually a really beautiful way for the movie to end. And it's a little bit of an inversion of The Little Mermaid, which is, it does come later, but you have Ariel wanting to be with Prince Eric and she gets her legs and she becomes human forever. Here, not only was the mermaid the one whose desire, drove this whole story, she rescues him several times and then he agrees to go with her to where she lives and where she always wanted to go back to. So I think I also like this movie just for Madison at the end. She gets everything that she wants in the end. And she does it very honestly and authentically. I will say there is a bit of a Born Sexy Yesterday, a lot of a Born Sexy Yesterday with this movie. Daryl Hannah is unbelievably beautiful and sexy in this movie. She is walking around wearing Tom Hanks' suit for a while, and you're just like, that is it. Like, that is the fashion that we need in the world. There's a lot of great 80s fashion. Watching this movie again, I was ready to pull out my oversized t-shirts and leggings, which is a style that I really rocked in the 90s when I was like 10. And she's a delight, but she definitely is extremely innocent. And there are these moments where you feel like she should get mad. She should say, like, what the hell are you doing, Alan? Like, you just abandoned me. But instead she says, I understand if you don't love me because I'm a mermaid and all these things. And he kind of comes around with her. But, there's something quite sweet about her, but also innocent. And at the same time, I don't know, I think that she does have a lot of agency. And I think by the end of the movie, we really see her power coming through, especially as a mermaid in her mermaid world. So one other thing I'll let you know is that the reason I rewatched Splash, I hadn't seen it in many, many years, but I had a hot dream about a merman who like came to land and, we had this relationship. It was very The Shape of Water kind of thing in my dream. And of course there was the mermaid motif, but I think there was also something about the erotic energy behind that dream that kind of drew me back to Splash and like wanting to rewatch it. And then as I was researching the movie just to learn a little bit more about it and so on, I found out that there has been a remake in the works for quite a while. The remake was planned in 2016 and it was supposed to star Channing Tatum as the merman. So the genders were going to be switched. There was going to be a human woman and a merman, and Channing Tatum was supposed to be that one. And in my dream, it was Austin Butler. And I feel like Channing Tatum is maybe out of that realm. Like, it's been quite a few years. Maybe he's on to some other things. Like we need someone a little bit more fresh. And I feel like Austin Butler would be so great in that role. But keep your ears out, because as of 2023, last year, there was still some talk that this remake is still supposed to happen. They were probably recasting it. They had a bunch of changes that they were going through, but it's still possible. It's still in the works. So I will be in that theater watching that remake. I don't know about you, but that's where I'm going to be when that movie comes out. Thanks for listening to Popcorn Therapy. Don't forget to subscribe. If you want to hear more from me, I'm on Instagram at Julie Peters Wellness. I often post short videos on this kind of topic on my TikTok, which is at Popcorn Therapy. You can go to my website, juliepeters.ca. If you want to get counseling from me, I do that online from anywhere. You could also get a tarot reading. You could also read some of my blog posts and so on. You could buy my books there. There's lots going on there. But again, thank you for listening, and I will catch you up next time.
Soundstripe.